don't claim to be an expert on Tolkien's work, okay? But I do claim to be a devoted fan who's read the books multiple times, watched the movies a million times, have done additional reading beyond the traditional Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and just, I think in general, also am a decent human being. So those accreditations give me the moral high ground to make this video. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. It's me, Lauren, filmmaker extraordinaire, and today we are talking about Lord of the Rings and Silicon Valley and how people miss the point. Also, because I have to brag about myself, I got little mushrooms to represent the hobbits. I got my Arwen necklace. I have my One Ring baby, and I'm also wearing my brand new Glam Light One Ring highlighter and Sauron lip kit. So, plus I got my Lord of the Rings bag back there, so I'm trying to represent. All right, now that I've bragged about myself and my thoroughness to the video, we're gonna get into it. The article really kicked off strongly with the headline, "Why Silicon Valley's Most Powerful People Are So Obsessed with Hobbits," with the subtitle being, "Tech Power Players and the Global Far Right Are Learning All the Wrong Lessons from The Lord of the Rings." This article is written by Michicho Katuani, and I apologize if I mispronounce her name. I do think that Katuani also has the wrong interpretations, but I am mostly going to be blaming the tech billionaires in this discussion. Right away in the first paragraph, we see, "The trilogy recounts how a motley group of friends set out on a journey to destroy the Great Ring of Power." Right here. This ring, by the way, went to the real Mount Doom in New Zealand, so it is authentic, okay? However, I was immediately annoyed about this motley group of friends because that's just like blatantly not true. And unfortunately, it did definitely give me a negative bias towards the rest of the article's like author points because this was immediately just wrong. Now, the hobbits, if they're just talking about the hobbits being the motley group of friends, maybe, right? Because they're motley, they're hobbits, and they are friends. However, even in that group, initially we have setting out from the Shire, we still technically have Gandalf, even though they kind of got, twisted around and Gandalf met them much later. But I would say he, although a friend of all the hobbits, is literally a Maya, basically almost like a god in this kind of Tolkien universe. So he's not motley at all. And if we're thinking about the general fellowship of the ring, who they actually set out to destroy the ring, because when the hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin leave the Shire, they're not planning on destroying the ring when they leave the Shire. They're just trying to get the ring to Rivendell, to the House of Elrond. Okay, they're not trying to destroy anything at this time. So I just disagree there. And again, the Fellowship, that literally has a elven prince, Legolas. It has the heir to the throne of Numenor and to Gondor, Aragorn, and we have Boromir, who is the steward's son. We also have Gimli, the dwarf lord. Like, these are not bums, all right? These are high caliber people, elves, dwarves, men, etc. of Middle-earth, not motley. We do also have Bill the Pony, who I would like to give a shout out to because I love Bill the Pony. The first paragraph isn't a total bust. I do agree with the sentence, "The ring corrupts all who use it, and its story endures as a potent allegory about the corrupting effects of greed and pride." I do think that is true. I unfortunately see greed and pride everywhere, especially with the tech billionaires, which is why, again, the article is correctly saying they're getting the wrong lessons from these stories. I would like to comment that although this really is talking about the One Ring Destroy saga, the greed and pride is not only in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, as we see greed with the kind of gold curse and what drives Thorin mad in The Hobbit. So I do think this is all-encompassing in his idea of Middle-earth. We can then cruise along with idolizing hippie cults vibes. I agree with that. And then we get to the kind of next section where they talk about just the popularity of the trilogy. And obviously, The Lord of the Rings is an incredibly popular high fantasy series. I would say the only other series that is maybe getting to be potentially that level would be Game of Thrones. I also really love The Wheel of Time, but I don't think overall Wheel of Time is at the same level as Lord of the Rings has. It is pervasive. People don't even understand sometimes if they're referencing something that came from Lord of the Rings, I think because it's just such a broad cultural phenomenon. And I love that, okay? I love that. So again, right, a lot of people are going to be fans of Lord of the Rings across different ideologies, values, political points, etc. and they might take what they want out of it, which they, are sort of entitled to do, in the sense that we all can look at art and get our own meaning and interpret art as we see fit. However, some things I think are just really blatant misreadings of the text or the subtext. I don't know what side it's on, but you should all go watch my media literacy video, because I think that could really help explain also why so many people aren't getting the right lesson from these stories and many others. One thing I found the author very interesting to reference was that she said, right-wing operatives realized that references to works like The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and role-playing games, many of which are heavily indebted to Tolkien, could serve their own political ends. I think this is really interesting because this line indicates a sort of disparate moment where we have people in tech who are greedy, knowingly using this Lord of the Rings fandom to their own ends, even though they know they're taking the wrong lessons from it, versus people who are oblivious to the fact that they're getting the wrong lessons from it. And I think we're going to see potentially both examples of those in the Billionaires that this article discusses, but I'm also just kind of curious for your thoughts in the comments. If you can think of any examples in your life or, in the world at large of someone who definitely knows what they're doing, but they're banking on other people's ignorance to achieve their own political ends. A good example that was referenced was in Spain, the far-right party Vox tried to hijack Lord of the Rings imagery, posting a picture of the warrior Aragorn facing off against a group of enemies depicted as left-wing, feminist, and LGBTQ groups. Now, we do notably have two very different Aragorns in book Aragorn and movie Aragorn. I mean, I do personally believe that their essence is sort of the same, but they definitely have different portrayals, whereas movie Aragorn, who I think most people probably think of when they think of Aragorn, just based on the fact that most people probably have read the books less or not at all than they've seen the movies. Movie Aragorn, I mean, we all know the door scene, right? That's like what we know Aragorn from, of course. But I'd say he seems very gentle. He cares about women, but he also respects women and their power. To this point, he does let, Arwen ride off, even though he's not initially happy about that in the beginning. She's like, I'm the faster rider. And he's like, okay, fine. He is supportive in a way of Éowyn and her swordsman skills. He respects that she can fight. And that's basically all his interactions with women, except for maybe some interactions with Galadriel, which are nothing really important happens there. So we don't see him being like, yes, women, but we don't see him being like, women suck either, versus I do think in the books, he's a little more old school masculine, whereas it's like the woman's place is not on the battlefield a little more directly versus having a little sword moment in the movie. However, I still don't think Aragorn would be against these values because he is a noble person. He believes in doing the right thing and for the good of all the people, uniting Middle Earth. And I do think he would include the gays in this unition of Middle Earth. Another notable difference, because I don't want someone to be like, oh, Lauren, you missed this, is that in the movies, he's like, I don't want that power. I've never wanted it. Versus in the books, he's more like, that is my power. I deserve this power. It is mine. And his whole Boromir feud is like not really in the books, but they kind of built it up in the movies for drama purposes. So again, book Aragorn, movie Aragorn, not the same thing, but I still think neither of those Aragorns would ever consent to be depicted this way because he's a good man and good men are not bullies and losers attacking marginalized groups. This next part, though, is another element where I think the author, I'm not sure if she missed the mark or if she's still just trying to be in the mind of the psycho-billionaires, but she says, for some right-wing politicians today, Lord of the Rings embodies nostalgia for a bygone era, conjuring a vaguely medieval past where there are clear hierarchies of authority and class and sharply delineated races, elves, dwarves, hobbits, and men with distinctive appearances and talents. I thought it was funny that she didn't mention men in this because, there are elves, dwarves, hobbits, and orcs, but also men. That's, one of the big factors is that the race of man and the age of man kind of thing, which I would have thought would be part of this golden glory age, but apparently not. I also think that whoever is thinking this, whether it's the author or, the billionaire people in Silicon Valley, they're missing the point where the only way to defeat Sauron and Saruman and just evil in general is to unite. We can't be these delineated races and entities. We have to be fighting together. This is the whole thing with Helm's Deep, the Rohirrim. They need the elves to come help and save them. And, Gandalf also brings more troops, which is helpful, but they unite together to win. And in the final battle, we have the whole squad together. There are less dwarves in the movies, but we do see them in other stories in general. They obviously are much bigger in The Hobbit, but Gimli is there. He is a very important character in The Lord of the Rings, the books and the movies, and they all work together to save the day. The hobbits help the men, elf and dwarf become buddies. These are all really important things that they're not sharply delineated. They are working together, and even the orcs, and even the Orcai, those are like twisted elves, and then elf, orc, twisted again. So they were once those, and they've gone kind of down the dark path, a way that they can't really turn from, and then they lose, right? So if we leave our working together to go our own way, we lose, right? So we should really be thinking about this in a really, in a deep way. I thought this line was funny. If today's corrupt status quo was toppled, we might return to a golden age of order. We never had a golden age of order. I really don't know where this idea that we had a golden age of order or anything like ever came from, because we overall in the globe did not. I mean, there were definitely successful empires, there was the Mayan Empire, Aztec Empire, Roman Empire, the Egyptian Empire, all that stuff. But was there ever a golden age of order? I feel like there was always chaos and crimes, because that's why people were punished, or people were were killed for sport with gladiators. I just don't really understand where this golden age idea comes from. It reminds me of a book that I read for history class called The Good Old Days, They Were Terrible, because we really romanticize a past that did not exist. So this just never existed. Then the author mentions a similar taste for kingly power has taken hold in Silicon Valley. And this again goes back to Aragorn is a bit different in the books and the movies. But I would say, again, if we think about, just say for the movies, for example, we think of the Steward of Gondor. He is greedy, he wants power, and he's a bad guy, right? He's not a good guy. He's not the supreme ultimate villain of Lord of the Rings, but he is a bad guy, and he ends up, burning and running off a cliff and dying. So things don't work out well for him. He seeks power so much, he refuses to accept help, he refuses to look beyond himself because he believes he has all the answers, he knows best, and he dies. That's the lesson we should be learning. We should be thinking about not what we want or what we deserve, but what is actually good for the overall populace, the overall people, and the society in which we live in today. Sort of to this end, I am curious how many people who are these right-wing operatives that misinterpret Tolkien have read the books versus watched the movies, and even if they have read the books, have they really paid attention, or were they just kind of skimming? Because in the article, it says that Peter Thiel has read The Lord of the Rings at least 10 times, but in my opinion, he must have just missed the point every single time, because what on earth, buddy? I found it very funny that in the article, they say this kingly power goes to the one-man rule and founder mode, because that's how we make decisions. Meanwhile, there's a whole council of Elrond to make the decision of what to do with the ring. Gandalf doesn't just decide what to do with it. Frodo doesn't just decide what to do with it. There's a literal whole council of people discussing what must be done, how best to do it, who's going to do it. It's a process. It's a group project. It's not one man up against the universe here, okay? Again, we're just missing the point. I really appreciated her mention of the venture capitalist Mark Anderson, who describes himself and his fellow travelers as undertaking the hero's journey, because they obviously don't know what the hero's journey is, because he says that is rebelling against the status quo, mapping uncharted territory, conquering dragons, and bringing home the spoils for our community. Now, the hero's journey is not about conquering villains, killing dragons, or bringing home gold. It's actually about character growth and transformation. You can undertake the hero's journey going outside your house to the garage if along the way you have to do something that gives you something that maybe you wouldn't usually do, like take out the garbage because you're afraid of a raccoon. You could have a hero's journey going from your door to the garage with the garbage. There's nothing that has to be this big glamorous thing as the hero's journey. The hero's journey is an internal journey. It's about being transformed at the end of the journey. You are no longer the person you were at the beginning, not because you're wealthier, but because your brain has changed, your heart has changed, something about you is different For example, Frodo does experience the hero's journey, not because he returns home with mithril, like a little mithril armor. No. He changes because, think about it, when we began The Lord of the Rings, Frodo is a young hobbit. He's basically like a kid at the beginning, right? A teenager. And he loves the Shire. He kind of like, travel, but he loves the Shire. Okay, that's where he feels like he belongs. This is his home. But at the end of Lord of the Rings, he cannot live in the Shire anymore. He has been so changed from his journey. He cannot accept this land that was once his home and his peace. And he ends up going to the Undying Lands because he is no longer the same hobbit he once was. And he's been he's been a transformed man, but he's a transformed hobbit. He has seen too much. He's seen the horrors of the world. He's seen wonders of the world. And what once was his whole universe is no longer satisfying in that way. And not because he's accomplished these great, wondrous things and everyone like treats him special or anything like that. In fact, it's more that he internally has been traumatized. He has PTSD. Okay, he's literally a traumatized guy who no longer is at peace with himself where he once was. It's just really important to me that we understand this, because if we think about, say, The Hobbit, Bilbo is a similar character, right? It starts with him being like very content with his life. He's a very wealthy hobbit. He doesn't do any adventuring. He doesn't get his nose in any trouble. And it ends with now he loves adventures. He loves kind of getting his nose into trouble. He has visitors come from foreign lands and he entertains them. He still is happy in the Shire. He's not like, I can never be here, but he's seen the world and he's adventurous now. He's excited. He takes opportunities. He wants to go do things. That's maybe more positive hero's journey. But if we think about maybe the greed aspect, bring home spoils, Thorin wants to bring home spoils, right? He wants to get the gold. And what does he get? He gets killed. Okay? Right. So it's not about the glory. It's about the change. Okay? Another quote that I'm so glad the author mentioned here from Anderson was that he said, we believe in nature, but we believe in overcoming nature. We are not primitives, cowering in fear of the lightning bolt. We are the apex predator. The lightning works for us. I feel like this is really Saruman of him, because I'm just thinking about when like Saruman's like bringing down the mountain. And I just thought that was really funny because, again, if we're thinking about who we compare ourselves to in overcoming nature, Saruman destroys all the trees. He like burns the forests. He's overcoming nature. And he's the villain. He's a bad guy. We should not be looking at this for approval and like, yes, evaporation, let's do that. That's the bad person. I honestly didn't take too many notes when it was talking about a duty to save the world, like this kind of page of the article, because this was a lot more actual, like talking about like IBM and who started. And that was like very wholesome with the initial people who like really loved Lord of the Rings and were like, ooh, let's name this room, Hobbit or whatever. I think that was really cute. But it obviously kind of spiraled into what we have today, where again, like something can start really positive and sweet and maybe an actual like genuine nerd, and then it becomes something crazy. We have Jeff Bezos, who is Amazon's founder guy. He's the man who has a yacht for his yacht. And he bought the Rings of Power because he's a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. And maybe it's a hot take, I enjoy the Rings of Power. I really like the more diverse cast. I like more women in the universe. I know some people have been upset by multiple things, and I do get that. But I'm not going to hate on Jeff Bezos for the Rings of Power necessarily. I can hate on him for other things. The next note that I took really has to do with another part where I think Silicon Valley people missed the mark. Because I do agree with the author saying that the stories acted as an extortion to think big and pursue huge improbable dreams. Because, yeah, obviously, like, for hobbits to start in the Shire and then end up at Mount Doom, fighting against the most powerful evil internally to try to destroy the One Ring, yeah, that's a really crazy dream. Or for Aragorn to start as, a ranger, he needs to get his throne back. That's a crazy dream. But these crazy dreams are not, let's take over the world with AI and make robots do everything and have a robot dog. Like, those are not the dreams that we're talking about here. We're talking about things that going out of our comfort zone, being brave, having courage, not exploiting resources for our own benefit. Then there's a section in the article about science fiction and, sci-fi. We don't talk about that for the purpose of this, but we will go to good old Elon Musk, who relates to high fantasy and sci-fi. And he thinks that the Foundation series and Tolkien's trilogy apparently his favorite book ever, helped to forge his grandiose sense of mission, and he felt a duty to save the world. I'm going to repeat myself. Again, the hobbits, everybody involved, like if we're thinking about, we relate to the hobbits, they didn't have the mission to save the world, okay? Initially, they just wanted to help their friends. They wanted to help, right? Like Frodo wants to help Gandalf. Sam, Merry, and Pippin want to help Frodo. Like they just want to help each other. They want to help who they know. And ultimately, this does end up saving the world, right? But they don't start by going like, I don't want to be a little hobbit. I want to be well-renowned. I want riches. I want glory. That's not what they're talking about. That's not what their life is about. They weren't born thinking, I deserve to be bowed to. Again, Aragorn in the book does want that stuff. But this article is claiming that they're more about like the hobbits. And again, Aragorn, yes, it's a big dream, but it's also his like rightful throne versus, for example, Elon Musk. I don't think we have the right to colonize Mars, okay? I think my favorite part of the article in the sense of yes moment was when she acknowledges what Tolkien really wanted. In this part of The Suspicious of Machine Worshippers, we have, it's astonishing how many contemporary takes on classic works of fantasy and science fiction fly in the face of both common sense and authors' known views of the world. Tolkien himself regarded machine worshippers with suspicion, even aversion. This is why Mordor is depicted as a hellish industrial wasteland, ravaged by war and environmental destruction, in contrast to the green and Dennick Shire that the hobbits call home. Exactly. And yet, what do the tech billionaires and the Silicon Valley giants want? They want to destroy the planet to get their precious minerals. They want to destroy ecosystems to build these giant data mining centers. They want to use up our fresh water. They want to cut down all these trees. These are not, these are not things that are being gentle to the earth and what Tolkien believed in. This is Mordor. This is industrializing everything. This is Sauron cutting down the woods and needing the Ents to go, fight back because the world is being destroyed. They're on the wrong side of history here. They're on the wrong side of Tolkien. They're on the wrong side of Lord of the Rings. And luckily for us, we know who wins in Lord of the Rings, don't we? Unfortunately, something I did sort of appreciate as a nerd reckoning for what Steele did is that he did name the data analytics firm Palantir from the Seeing Stones, which I do respect. But I think what's extra important to remember here, which I think is kind of evil fun, and maybe he was thinking this, maybe he wasn't, is like what I really think about is when, Pippin's looking through the Seeing Stone, like that's a bad thing. And of course, when we first kind of get accustomed to the Seeing Stones and Gandalf sees the one that Saruman has, he's like, we must be careful. We don't know who else is watching, right? So using the stone, you can see things, but also who is then tracking you? Who is seeing you? And I just think that's very poignant, especially in today's age when a lot of things are talking about like safety, privacy concerns, data concerns. This kind of goes back to my data video, actually, if you want to watch that. I really just slid that in there off the cuff. That was not planned to be brought up. But I do appreciate the name for like data watching. I think that's clever, but also now we're watching you, Steele, right? Like we're watching you and someone else is watching me. Like we're all watching each other, which can be kind of creepy, honestly. We're going to move on. Something I also found really beautiful about the article was this element about what does it mean to be human. In the case of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien argued that mortality is part of the given nature of men, and the elves called it the gift of God to men, allowing them to release from the weariness of time. Now, of course, the men who become the Nazgul and everything, like they're kind of lured with these promises of immortality, great power, beyond what normal men can be, and of course that ruins them ultimately. So it's really something beautiful to think about the fact that we have this one life, and that is precious. And obviously, Arwen chooses to give up her immortal life to live with the love of her life, Aragorn, and, die eventually. And of course, elves can die. Remember, like if they're killed other ways, they just won't die of old age. But I just think it's really important to remember that Tolkien really believed in the power of being alive while you're alive, not to live on forever, but you have one life, what you choose to do with it, and then you get to move on to whatever comes kind of next, but you don't have to keep enduring over and over. And we see this endurance as a negative thing. I mean, Bilbo is like, I feel stretched like butter over too much bread, right? This is not a pleasant feeling. He might be like living longer than he's supposed to, but he's not happy. He's not feeling a benefit of living longer. He's feeling unsettled, discomforted, and then he can be at peace when he gives up the ring. And yes, he goes to the Undying Lands, but again, that's kind of like another place, I would say, allegorically. he no longer is going to just live forever as a regular hobbit in Bag End. This also just reminded me of that guy, Brian, who is like the millionaire dude, whoever, who's obsessed with like his like body health, and the one who took like plasma from his son for a time and how he's trying to stay young. And he's just a weirdo, but this reminded me of him. What I wrote with this line that I thought was funny, even though it's not original, was I wrote, "You can't have your cake and eat it too," to the point of how many readers of Lord of the Rings no longer identify with hobbits, but crave more magical powers of the very sort that the dangerous ring promises to bestow at a terrible price. And this again goes with Steele trying to be immortal, saying, the elves are humans who don't die. Why can't we be elves? Again, missing the point of how Tolkien really loved humanity and the one life and the simple things, farming, ale, whatever, smoking tobacco, like those are the hobbit things. But even like men, they do beautiful things, they build nice things, they explore, they accomplish stuff, they leave a legacy, and then they move on for new people to do things. Like, we don't need to be immortal and live on forever, because if we do enough of an impact and we're good while we are alive, that's what I think is important. Yes, of course, it's hopefully your loved ones kind of remember you and move on, with you in their hearts as they live their lives. But you don't need the whole world to know your name to be a good person and to leave your mark on the world in a positive way. I did appreciate that the author referenced Curtis Yarvin's reference of Trump voters as hobbits who only want to grill and raise kids in a dismissive tone, because I think that it's fair that people want a safe and secure life, but I think there's a huge difference between but I personally believe a lot of the people who voted for Trump are mostly the uninformed and uneducated, because the education system in this country is very bad, and there's a lot of like high power money propaganda that really pushes certain narratives that, unless you have media literacy skills and also just the ability and the time to try to stay informed, you're not going to get. So I do think that although it does hurt me that Trump won the election, dismissing people who voted for him as basically just like morons who just want to grill is not helpful and is not going to solve our nation's problems, when we really need to be working on our education system and really addressing deep-rooted issues that exist under Republicans and Democrats. I don't want to veer too much off into that because I don't want this video to go off the rails. I really just want to stay annoyed at the tech billionaires. But I just want to say that I appreciate that line, because that dismissiveness is one of the main reasons I think that certain groups of people in America are not feeling represented and seen by maybe more traditional politicians, because they're looked at maybe like as like condescendingly, patronizingly, and that's not going to solve our problems, because we need to have a seat for everybody at the table. Devastatingly, and I say this with love, the article does mention that Tolkien believes that it's the humble Sam who is the real hero of the epic. And I know Tolkien believes this, like he's written it in his letters. My dad definitely believes this as well. And I know Tolkien believes this. Like, it's not Frodo who's the hero. It's not Aragorn. It's not Gandalf. It is Sam. And I respect that. I like Sam. I really do. Definitely as I've gotten older, I respect him more. But I really still in my heart believe Frodo is the hero, because I relate to him the most with like my own mental illnesses and my mental health journey. And Frodo literally gets like, PTSD and traumatized, and he goes through a lot. He's my hero. He may not be the hero, but he is my hero. I thought the article ended fabulously with, he saw the heroics of Sam and Frodo as a testament to his belief that small hands move the wheels of the world because they must while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. And I just think that's a beautiful one, because obviously in Lord of the Rings, Sam and Frodo and Gollum are able to get, the ring up to Mount Doom because Sauron is very preoccupied with everything else going on in the land of Mordor, but also just in general, like teamwork makes things happen. If we're only kind of focusing on one era of life, everyone can see what's going on, but if everybody is involved across, the globe, across society to make the world a better place, attacking on fronts of women's rights, healthcare across the board, queer rights, an end to genocide, these are all things that when everyone's going forwards, like, you can't just get away with covering one thing up, because everybody is working hard to get things done, to get things accomplished. And I just thought that was a really positive, nice way to end the article. So again, I don't think I said anything really enlightening necessarily that you've never heard before, but I really wanted to talk about this. I hope you enjoyed just the video in general and the article. It is in the New York Times. I got to read the article using my library card, so check to see if you can read it in full with using your library card, because yay libraries. And with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you go and change the world for the better while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. And I will see you next time, sadly not in full Lord of the Rings garb setup, but still as a hobbit in my heart, because Frodo is the love of my life, okay? And that's all there is to say, okay? Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, comment down below whatever you want to comment, and I will see you next time, so don't forget to subscribe. Bye.